This story is so tragic and sad. It's just hard to comprehend. It's out of East Canton, Ohio. And the story surrounds an 8-month-old boy who was just beginning his life, but now he is being mourned by loved ones after his life was cut way too short. His mom left him in someone else's care while she went to work. That is something that happens every day across the country in almost every single community. And as a parent, it's not something that even crosses your mind. You drop your child or your children off at daycare and you expect that when you come at the end of the day to pick them up, that they will be there and you're going to bring them home. But that didn't happen in this particular case out of Ohio that we're talking about today. It led to a moment where a daycare worker is caught on police body cam and she's hyperventilating as she is slapped with handcuffs with the help of the U.S. Marshals. And worst of all, this daycare allegedly shouldn't even have been open. Now, we're going to get to more of that in that arrest body cam footage later in this episode, but we need to talk about
Quote,
how
she advised that she dropped off her son to the babysitter earlier in the morning, when the babysitter later contacted her by phone, stating that the child was not breathing. That is the sterile, bureaucratic language of the East Canton Police Department incident report. Dry ink on a page. Summarizing the moment a mother learned that the place she entrusted with her child had become a crime scene. Before we go deeper into what the documents actually show, make sure you're subscribed to the VerdictOrigin. Because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. Think of this case as a photograph slowly developing in a darkroom. At first, you see only a vague outline: home, a woman, a tragedy. But as the chemical process pulls the image into focus, you begin to see the full picture. And what emerges is not a simple accident, but an operation that was, according to the state, a disaster waiting for a clock to run out. What was officially described in casual conversation as babysitting was, on paper, an unlicensed daycare facility with no emergency plan, no cameras, and a caregiver who could not tell police the last name of a 1-year-old child in her custody. The gap between the official story and the reality is not just wide, it is a chasm.
But I want to jump right into it here. So all of this begins on March 10th of this year. It is 1:39 in the afternoon when an officer with the East Canton Police Department responds to a home to help paramedics with a medical emergency. And this medical emergency involves an 8-month-old boy, and his name was Grant Simmons. When the officer arrives, medics were already on their way to the hospital. So the responding officer talked to a woman who was still present at the home. It's a 45-year-old woman. Her name is Melanie Demarzio. According to the incident report, Demarzio pointed the officer in the direction of Simmons' mom, who is also still at the home. The officer and the patient's mom then go to the hospital. Now, as emergency staff attempted to revive the 8-month-old boy, the officer spoke with his mom. Quote, she advised that she dropped off her son to the babysitter earlier in the morning when the babysitter later contacted her by phone, stating that the child was not breathing. She stated that she spoke to her by phone at approximately 1:20 p.m. She stated that she had no indication of what could have happened to the child. A nurse came into the hallway and assisted the mother into the room where the child was pronounced deceased a short time later. Now to this day, it is unclear
The
exactly
narrative begins on March 10th at 1:39 in the afternoon, when an officer responds to a medical emergency at a private residence. Paramedics are already rushing an 8-month-old boy, Grant Simmons, to the hospital. At the home, the officer encounters 45-year-old Melanie Demarzio, who directs him to the child's distraught mother. A short time later, Grant Simmons is pronounced dead. The initial impression is one of profound, random loss. But then, the civil complaint filed by the village of East Canton hits the docket, and the image sharpens with brutal clarity.
It is unclear exactly what caused Simmons' death, but there is a civil complaint that was filed by the village of East Canton that paints a chilling picture of Demarzio's daycare operation. So the court documents were filed on March 20th after the city learned that she was planning to reopen her daycare on March 23rd, which is just 13 days after the incident at her home where a child passes away. This lawsuit claims that inside the property, East Canton police discovered Demarzio was providing childcare services at her home to several infants, and toddlers. And one of the big questions we're going to talk about in this case is from a legal perspective, a criminal perspective. When does babysitting turn into an unlicensed daycare? That is a question that's very much at the center of this case. Now, when police interviewed Demarzio, she allegedly had difficulty recalling how many children she babysat on a day-to-day basis, but she reportedly said she has between 5 and 10 children that she babysits at the property in exchange for $45 per day paid in cash. The civil complaint also laid out the following allegations. Quote, officers learned that defendant Melanie Demarzio did not have appropriate supervision or sleeping arrangements for infants and toddlers at the property. Defendant Melanie Demarzio indicated she would either prepare food for children at the property or otherwise give children food provided by parents. Defendant Melanie Demarzio did not have
Demarzio had between 5 and 10 children in that house daily, paying $45 cash. She had no CPR certification, no medical training protocol, no baby monitors. She was dispensing medications like amoxicillin based solely on parental verbal instruction. The house was not a home with a few extra kids, it was a silent assembly line of unsupervised care. She didn't know the children. She warehoused them.
Demarzio did not have current CPR certification or any other medical training. It did not have any formal protocol for administering medications such as Tylenol, eye drops, or amoxicillin, but informed officers she would follow any instructions given to her by parents. Defendant Melanie Demarzio admitted that she had no emergency plan in place for former protocol in the event of a fire or other emergency at the property. Defendant Melanie Demarzio further acknowledged that she did not utilize any baby monitors or cameras at the property to monitor children who were housed in different areas of the property. On the date that Grant Simmons unfortunately passed away, defendants had at least 5 children staying at the property, including him, 2 children who were 23 months old, a 1-year-old child, a 3-year-old child, and a 4-year-old child. For one of the children, who was 1-year-old, defendant Melanie Demarzio informed officers with the East Canton Police Department that she did not know the child's last name. In addition to Demarzio's alleged lack of responsibility within the daycare's operation, the lawsuit also accuses the business itself of being unlicensed, exceeding Ohio's limits on the number of children under the age of 2, along with never obtaining the required conditional zoning certificate to operate within the home. As a result of these allegations, the civil complaint seeks to shut down Demarzio's daycare for good, in addition to monetary damages. The same day the lawsuit was filed, a temporary restraining order was placed on the daycare, meaning it needed to cease operations immediately pending a further hearing. That order was converted into a preliminary injunction on March 31st, so the daycare will no longer be able to
operate. And here is where the moral refrain first applies. She tried to reopen.
March 23rd, which is just 13 days after the incident at her home where a child passes away. This lawsuit claims that inside the property, East Canton police discovered Demarzio was providing childcare services at her home to several infants and toddlers. And one of the big questions we're going to talk about in this case is from a legal perspective, a criminal perspective. When does babysitting turn into an unlicensed daycare? That is a question that's very much at the center of this case. Now, when police interviewed Demarzio, she allegedly had difficulty recalling how many...
File that phrase away, because it is the engine of this entire prosecution. On March 20th, 10 days after Grant Simmons stopped breathing, the village learned Demarzio planned to resume operations on March 23rd. The civil complaint was filed immediately. A temporary restraining order converted to a preliminary injunction. The darkroom photograph suddenly reveals a second, more disturbing layer: the immediate, reflexive instinct to continue the enterprise before an autopsy was even concluded. 13 days. That is the chronological distance between a child's death and the scheduled reopening of the facility where it happened. The sheer audacity of that timeline transforms this case from a potential accident investigation into something starker. Prosecutors clearly saw a pattern of risk normalization. When you operate without a license, you operate without oversight. When you operate without oversight, there is no external mechanism to tell you to stop. So you don't. You just keep going. Unless the state steps in, unless a lawsuit lands, unless U.S. Marshals arrive at your door.
The final pretrial hearing is scheduled for November 12th of this year, and the civil trial is slated for December 28th. So remember, that's just the civil side of the case that we're talking about today. So we can turn here now our focus to the criminal implications. So now we're going to fast forward to July 16th, and Demarzio is indicted by a grand jury on a felony first-degree charge of involuntary manslaughter, a third-degree felony charge of endangering children, and another third-degree felony charge of involuntary manslaughter. If convicted on all counts, she could face more than 20 years in prison and over $40,000 in fines. So we're going to get to the moment Demarzio is arrested, which was on July 21st by the East Canton Police Department with assistance from the U.S. Marshals, 5 days after she was indicted by that grand jury. But this is how that played out on police body cam footage.
That arrival came on July 21st, 5 days after a grand jury indicted Demarzio on charges of involuntary manslaughter and endangering children. The body camera footage captures the moment the theoretical consequence becomes physical. The handcuffs click. The breathing becomes uncontrolled. The words, "Oh my God," repeat in a loop.
Come out, we'll get her down there, get her booked, and then Patricia can give me a call. Come on,
This is one, I understand your job.
Right.
But this is a woman that's about ready to have another.
We'll get her taken care of.
You're a very good appearance.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You've been here before.
All right.
I don't have to.
You want to leave all your children here, so that way you don't gotta put it in your property. Just leave it all here.
What'd you say? You'll call.
Yeah,
She'll get the call. She's gonna get booked, and then she'll probably see the judge, and she'll be able to give you guys a call.
She'll get booked in, and then she'll get a free phone call when she's put in the hold. They need cut off. Okay, they can cut them off there. They have equipment to do it.
Take a deep breath. It's just a warning.
I can't go anywhere, so she called me.
What?
You guys transporting me want us to.
Step on down here. Take a deep breath.
We can.
Don't fall down.
Do me a favor. Just turn around. We do have to cuff you up. Go ahead and put your hands behind your
Any
back.
chance that you're pregnant?
No.
Okay.
No. What?
Just relax. Palms together. And you're praying. There you go.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Melanie, take a deep breath.
Slow down.
Hey, Aaron. Or actually, you can do it. Hey, Aaron, you can break down. You want to give her a pat down?
My.
Let's step forward.
Don't fall backwards. Take a breath. Take a breath. Take a breath.
Don't lock your knees.
All right, I'm sure she'll be giving you guys a call here shortly, all right?
Give it about an hour, hour and a half.
Melanie, just breathe. Just breathe. You gotta breathe.
We gotta get a picture of one foot at a time. Scoot over a little bit. All right, don't go anywhere, okay? All right, guys. You got handcuffs?
Good?
I do.
All right, I'm glad.
I'll give them back to you.
I was worried. I know this is kind of a big deal. I'll cook your guys' case for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No worries.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, you guys are going to the wrong address there.
Melanie, try to breathe. Try to breathe. Calm down. Calm down. Okay. Just breathe. Breathe.
Demarzio.
It is a scene of personal collapse, yet the procedural machinery surrounding it is deliberate and unmoved. The charging documents allege a first-degree felony carrying a potential sentence exceeding 20 years.
Demarzio was booked into the Stark County Jail on a $100,000 bond, which was posted 2 days after her arrest. According to her court docket, she is required to wear a GPS monitor in addition to other pretrial release conditions. She is due back in court for a pretrial hearing on August 19th, and we're going to be sure to monitor this case as it continues to unfold. But before we bring in our guest, retired NYPD Detective David Sarney, I do want to share a little bit more about the life of the person whose life was just beginning, the person at the center of this case, 8-month-old Grant Simmons. And this was taken from his obituary. Quote, "Though Grant's time here was not nearly long enough, he touched the lives of all those who were lucky enough to know him. Grant was full of life and was always smiling. He enjoyed Coco Melon and his toy excavator. He will always be remembered as his mommy's little stink." End quote. Join us now to talk more about this is retired NYPD Detective David Sarney.
The breakdown on the tape is human. The legal framework supporting the arrest is mercilessly logical. She tried to reopen. That is the second time that phrase appears. And here it carries the full weight of the criminal complaint. If negligence caused a death, then attempting to restart the identical operation without any remediation suggests a fundamental failure to recognize the negligence itself. It is not merely sad, it is legally significant. It transforms a tragedy into evidence of ongoing endangerment. Now we arrive at the thriller moment, the ticking clock, buried inside the national implications of this case. The Bureau of Labor Statistics confirms childcare costs have outpaced inflation for decades, forcing millions of working parents into the shadow economy of unlicensed care. The question is no longer whether unlicensed daycare centers exist in your neighborhood. The question is, how many children are sitting in those living rooms right now, at this very second? In a house without a fire evacuation plan, while the operator doesn't know their full names. This is not a story about one woman in Ohio. This is a story about the hidden infrastructure of risk that economic desperation constructs, and the precise moment that infrastructure collapses into a criminal indictment.
Thousands of these. The only time we find out about these daycare centers being unlicensed is when a tragedy like this happens. And to have an 8-month-old die in their custody, and families, and again, I talk about always about the legal side and the police side of it, but there's a social side to this where if you have nowhere else to go and it's such a cheap, affordable daycare, you let a lot of things slide as a family or as a parent. You really can't, because you're leaving them in the custody and care of that person for how many hours? And $45 a day is relatively cheap, but to what cost is it for you when something like this happens? And I can't imagine how the parents are when your 8-month-old is dies in this place.
Yeah, I mean, look, this isn't a parenting, podcast, but like the idea, like daycare is just unaffordable. Like licensed daycares is unaffordable for so many people. And like you look at this story and you have a mom that drops off her son and she goes to work. This isn't someone who's just like going off on their own or whatever. Like she is out there grinding. And you think of like the options to watch your child. There's not a lot out there that you can afford. I mean, it's thousands of dollars a month, typically, daycares. And so like $45 a day, there's that option. And like, it's just, you just assume that you are going to be picking your child up at the end of the day. The boy dies in March, and then the daycare owner, if you want to call her that owner, didn't really own a daycare, just, the suspect in this case, she's arrested in July. What do you make of that timeline of how long it took to make an arrest?
Well, you have to go through several factors. You have to then go to legitimacy. You have to look for the licensing, because it takes time to build a case like this. Because even though you have a death of a child, does that necessarily mean the death was due to negligence? And that's why autopsies are coming in, the investigation forward on that, talking to the owners of the daycare, finding out that they have how many kids they have in their care, which is too many for that age. Their ability to handle emergencies, which were very lacking. They didn't have CPR certification. Their food sources were pretty much from the families. When you deal with families' daycare, and I say the $1,000 you spend, you have to really vet them out. And I understand you want to you try to do the best you can, but always vet these individuals to determine if they're legitimate, especially
The autopsy report remains under seal as of this recording. The exact mechanism of death has not been disclosed publicly. That forensic ambiguity does not halt the involuntary manslaughter charge. The charge rests on the totality of the environment, the lack of certification, the volume of children, the absence of monitoring, and the decision, the documented, legally actionable decision, to prepare for a reopening while investigators were still building their case.
I feel for the family. You're put in a bad spot. You don't know what to do. This person has maybe a word of mouth. We don't know how she advertised her business, because it is a business when you start almost warehousing kids in your house. That's a warehousing thing, and thereby it's a business. No signs to say to daycare center, just word of mouth. I gather what happened. And those kids, I don't know what her relationship was to the parents or other parents there. But the babysitter thing changed the minute when you took on so many other infants and kids.
What do you make of the fact, I just found it shocking that you have this case where this young boy loses his life, and we'll talk a little bit more. It seems unclear at this point, the exact cause of death, but she tries to open up the daycare again. Typically, I think of some of the sad cases we've had where even the licensed daycares, it's hard to come back from that. To even open, whether or not there was any wrongdoing whatsoever. What does that tell you, maybe from the criminal side of things, when you're looking to prosecute someone, that this was a person that had this happen and then continues on and allegedly tries to reopen the operation?
Yeah, that's a big thing. And when I saw that she tried to reopen it after this incident, and I don't know if she had any prior incidents, and that's something they're looking into, any 911 calls or 311 calls, any aides that went to that house. So, but to do that, on a legal perspective, it seemed there's the lack of caring, negligence, maybe to that point where you think your system is better than what it is. I mean, you have a death of a child in your care, whether the child died at the residence or at the hospital, it doesn't matter. To sit there and say, what I did was okay. Oh, I'll get over it. Let's start again. If you went into a doggy daycare, and I'm talking about just dogs and pets, would you want to send your dog to a location that had a death of there? And that's the thing. Since there's no record of that and no one would have known about it, she could have found other clients and did the same thing with them and saying, I'm cheap, I'm available, and do this without anyone knowing that this death occurred.
She tried to reopen. That is the third and final refrain, and it lands here as a closing argument. The preliminary hearing is scheduled. The civil trial is set for late December. A GPS monitor tracks her movements. The legal system has, for now, succeeded in shutting the operation down where market forces and personal judgment failed.
When it comes to like the job of an investigator in this case, because on one hand, you are investigating the death of this child. On the other hand, like to your point, I mean, there's thousands, tens of thousands of unlicensed daycares that are going on today right now. And we do see really sad cases like this one, unfortunately happen far too often. Like what work, and it seems like, you know, the city side of it, the town is like making efforts to try and close this daycare down forever. But like, what's the role of the police in that part of it? Because like you have the investigation into the child, but then it seems like it's more always on the civil side where it comes to an investigation into exactly what was going on at this daycare.
Right. A lot of times we talk about these nuisances. We had nuisance abatement when places or locations were considered a nuisance. We had to have 3 types of criminal actions before we could actually close the place down by the law department. When you talk about this type of case, is the criminal side of it is the investigation upon the infant death. But the other part has to go through the court system because we cannot particularly close it because as civil court is doing that. That's why it's on the civil side. Police we can close it down for a little bit, but she could reopen it. I mean, think about that. There was a death at her daycare center, not directly in her daycare center, but a death that took place started at her location. Yet she had, and we'll call it the audacity to reopen. And could the police have stopped that? Not particularly, because you know we make an arrest again about endangering the welfare. It depends what the penal law states that what police can do to enforce. And I always say this: police do have 4 main responsibilities: reducing crime, preventing crime, apprehending people who are violators of law, and providing social services. How much social service we can do here, at least as far as East Canton Police Department, is take that information, give it to the civil court, and let the court.
You can review the East Canton Village civil complaint yourself. It is public record, filed on March 20th, and every allegation we discussed is drawn directly from its pages. Pull that document. Read the list of deficiencies, the missing cameras, the absent CPR certification, the unknown last names. Then answer this question in the comments below. At what precise number of children does a home become a hazard? And who should be responsible for counting before the police are forced to respond? Thank you for watching the VerdictOrigin. If you want more deep dive documentary breakdowns of cases where the paper trail tells the real story, like this video, share it, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next investigation.